plan or idea of what to do. Otherwise, we're all just kind of stumbling in the dark, right? Right. Right, right. All right, let's go on and give it a shot. No, you know, the thing is, since we've been start off with, I figure I'll do something I usually don't do just to see how it goes. Now, you know, one of the things when I was thinking about, when starting this whole thing of thinking about, well, gosh, how do we talk about world peace? One of the things that came to mind was, okay, well, I oftentimes hear when you start things off, maybe you're supposed to start off with a joke or something like that to get things going, right? So I thought, okay, let me go. And what do you do? If you're looking for a joke on world peace, what are you going to do? The first thing? Google it. Right? Exactly. So I Google it. The first thing comes up. I click. The first joke that comes up, and my dad knows about 11:30 at night or something like that. And all of a sudden I start cracking up, and I'm coming here. I said, Dad, look at this. He goes, yeah, go on and do it. But I don't always give jokes, but I'm going to give it a shot. All right. All right. Here we go. So, there's this woman walking along a beach, right? And as she's going along in the sand, she sees a genie lamp. And she's thinking, this can't be true. So she picks up the genie lamp and she rubs it. And hope beyond hope, a genie comes out of the lamp. And she says, this is great. So she talks to the genie and says, Genie, do I get the standard 3 wishes? And the genie goes, well, you know, inflation, I'm not getting paid that much. Things are much harder than they used to be. No more 3 wishes. You only get 1 wish. And so the woman thinks about it for a while, but it doesn't really take her that long. And she goes, you know what? I want peace in the Middle East. And she pulls out a map and see all these countries right here. I want them to be peaceful and to love each other. And the genie goes, are you crazy? I can't do that. These people have been at war with each other for thousands of years. That's even beyond my power. You got to give me something else. What else do you want? And so the woman thinks about it for a while. She's kind of struggling, but then she goes, I know what I want. Genie, I want a good man. I want someone who's going to be faithful, who loves me, who's kind, who gets along with my family and friends, who cooks and cleans and does all of these different things. I want a good man. And the genie looks at her and sighs and says, can I look at that map again? so I say this all to say.
It's true.
Right. I say this all to say, and I think it really does relate. One of the things I liked about it, in terms of the joke, but I think it really relates sometimes when people think about world peace. A lot of times, I think people think that it really is going to take magic. We're going to have that genie come in and do something magical, because there's no way in the world that we as humanity are actually going to make this thing happen. So, I was hoping that tonight, when we have the discussion, that we might be able to work things out to understand how we might not need a genie. All right? So the first thing is, we're really going to look at 2 primary things. Is world peace possible? And if it is possible, how can it be accomplished? Because you got to have more than just a vague hope. You got to have some way of actually making it happen. In terms of tonight, what I'm hoping is that we can have more of a discussion than just kind of like a presentation as such. I mean, if you look at it, every single one of us are going to need to be involved in this process. You know, it's not that one person or another is going to make this happen. All of us need to be involved in it, and that means all of us have a say. All of us have an opportunity to have input into it. But we also realize that tonight's time is limited, so as we have discussions, if people can be concise with their responses, that would be great. Besides that, one of the things that really gets me excited about tonight is the fact that we're doing this in the United States. Some of you may not know, I'm actually from Belize. I live in Belize. I've been down there for about 13 years right now. And Belize is a great country and obviously has a stake in world peace as well. But in terms of the opportunity for people in that country to think about world peace, it's probably a little bit more limited than it is in the United States. So, in my mind, the U.S. and its citizens probably have the most at stake in terms of this issue of world peace. Does anybody have some thoughts as to why that might be the case?
Well, because it's been so dominant in the world.
Right. It's a dominant country. And because it's
more to, quote, lose with giving up its sovereignty.
Oh, that's true too. If something really bad happens, we in the United States have as much to lose as anybody else. Any other thoughts?
If there's no peace in other parts of the world, everyone's going to want to come here, and
That's true,
then
too.
people are going to leave their countries that have resources and opportunities, but there's no peace, so they're going to,
Caravan.
That's a very good point, and we see that, as we all know, anybody that looked at TV these days for 15 seconds, that's a big issue in terms of refugees, both in terms of in this area, but also from Europe and that type of thing. You're absolutely right.
Syria, I mean, those,
Exactly.
Sudan,
I was just going to say globalism, the economic relationship, all the countries are talking to each other. The big economic countries are exchanging more, but all countries are exchanging some.
Right.
So peace makes it easier for everybody to do business.
Everybody, but the thing is that came to mind was, especially in terms of the United States, is the United States is involved in everything. There's not a single part of the world, almost unlike any other country, the United States, either because it wants to or because it feels it has to, is involved in almost anything. As someone mentioned, trade. We got the China thing going on right now, as everybody knows about. We got the EU, and there's issues there. This Canada-Mexico thing was a big issue for a while, and still hasn't fully been resolved. Then you've got the nuclear proliferation issue with North Korea and Iran. You've got this whole, what level of interference? I don't know. Whatever. Russia, China, Iran is there as well. War, Syria and Yemen. Migrants. We talked about migrants just a while ago. Central America, Mexico, all this other type of stuff. Terrorism with ISIS in the Middle East. And I didn't even know about this. Shaba or something like that. Shabab. Down in Somalia. We're there. We're over in Africa too. Israeli-Palestinian conflict. We're right in the middle of that. We just moved our embassy, right? And that caused the whole big thing. Virtually no other country would have moved its embassy, would have caused so much of a kind of almost like an earthquake over there, besides the United States. NATO management, who's going to pay what? Should we be involved? Should we not be involved? Are we really going to go to the defense of another country? We're right in the middle of that. Climate change. I think we're the only country that pulled out of that agreement so far. Military spending and budgets, all of that type of stuff is all related to this issue of the United States and whether the world is at peace or not. The more the conflict, the more difficulties that are going on, the more the United States has to get involved. So in terms of the U.S. and its citizens, the U.S. has more at stake than anybody else in terms of this issue, so it'd be interesting to kind of work it out and see what we can put together. Okay, the other thing that was really exciting to me was I literally got this email just a couple of days ago. So there's something called the Baha'i Chair for World Peace. And there was literally 2 or 3 weeks ago a conference about world peace and global peace and security. And what was said there I found was absolutely fascinating. The pursuit of peace must be sustained indefinitely because the barriers are big and complex. So we talked about, is it simple? It's not simple, right? It's big and complex. We have to bring new thinking into this process. We have to raise consciousness about this complex endeavor. We have to bring more like-minded people together to explore the ideas and essential strategies. And that's exactly what we're doing tonight. So I was just really excited about this. I'm sitting there thinking, there's no way in the world you couldn't, script this any better. So there's other people in the world that are getting together, having conferences, talking about these issues. And one of the things that they're mentioning at these conferences is the fact that people of like mind have to get together and start talking about this to get a better idea of how we can move forward. Okay, so we talked about this a little bit, but when you hear about peace is not only possible, but inevitable, how does that make people feel? And do people feel that peace is really possible? So when you first heard that, how did people feel?
Dubious.
Dubious? Why is peace possible, right? Well,
No, the inevitable part.
Okay. So you think it could be possible, but it doesn't necessarily have to be inevitable. Okay. Yeah. Any other thoughts? Exciting. Okay. Good. All right. So the reason why the title of this gathering is The Promise of World Peace is because there was a statement, The Promise of World Peace, that was put together by the lead Baha'i institution in, I believe it was 1986, the 40th year of the UN. and the Year of Peace. And basically in there, it made this statement: peace is not only possible, but inevitable. And in that statement, it basically said that there's several different types of feelings that many people feel when thinking about this idea of peace. One is hope and joy. That people like to feel safe, and they want the best for their friends and families and really everybody else in the world. And so can anybody think of events that inspire this kind of feeling of hope and joy that are kind of like international people getting together, that type of thing?
Landing on the moon, there was this universal sort of thing of knowing the joy.
Right, exactly. But let's say, where can we think of something where groups of people get together and really work together to accomplish something or to do something? Olympics would be one. That's one I thought about. Any other ideas? All right, so let's go. So I wish my wife gave me a clicker. I wish I had it here. But anyway, yeah, I thought about the Paris Accords too, where over 200, I got the Olympic Games, and we had the Paris Accords where over 200 countries got together to work. They recognized that there might be an issue with climate change, and they came together to work on this issue all together. Those type of things are going on and kind of inspire hope in people that maybe by working together as humanity, we can solve some of the problems that we're facing. But at the same time, there's this issue of despair. Kind of like what you're saying, is this really going to happen? I don't know. And maybe it's not possible because humanity is just aggressive and selfish. Can anybody think of examples of where that's aggressiveness or selfishness? Well, give me one or two. Just go to two. I know there's many, but... Okay, that would be one. That's one. What else? But you know, the thing that's true with that one is the fact that a lot of times with progress comes setbacks every now and then. So that's part of the whole thing, right? Very rarely do you have a straight line going up and it never has any backside, you know. So you do have that as well. Anything else?
Well, the RAND agreement.
Oh, the RAND agreement as well, right? So you had a group of nations coming together, and then all of a sudden you kind of pull out and that type of thing. So yeah, that's true. Brexit. Oh, Brexit is and that's the whole thing, is that back and forth thing. But
border wall.
Okay, that's right, the separation type thing going on. So the idea that came to mind, some of the Syria-Yemen civil war, you know, millions of people are suffering, dying, all these other type of things. And then it turns out there's over 14 countries in the world where there's children soldiers. Can you imagine? It's hard enough being a child as is, and yet you're going to have thousands of people being soldiers, the children soldiers, kind of ruining and devastating their lives. So there's that as well. So the idea is both sets of feelings are understandable, but what I'm hoping we can do tonight is really address these two questions. Is world peace possible? And if yes, what needs to be done to achieve it? And that will hopefully help to address this kind of dichotomy where you have both of these sets of feelings that, you know, unless we address this in some way or another, it's going to be hard to get this done because not everybody's going to be fully behind what it is we're trying to do. Okay. So when we talk about is peace possible, I guess there's two different ways of looking at it. For some people, you believe that there's a God, right? And God created universities, and there's a spiritual reality that's created. And as Baha'is, we believe that that spiritual reality includes the idea that we really are all one family. And as it says right here, of one tree are all ye the fruit, and of one brow the leaves. The world is but one country, and mankind its citizens. Let a man glory in that he loves his, no, not that he loves his country. Let him rather glory in this, that he loves his kind. So the whole idea is, once that statement is made, once that spiritual reality is set, it kind of sets things in motion such that that spiritual reality eventually has to manifest itself in the material world as well. But we're not talking about just the idea of peace being an end to war. We're really talking about an organic change in the way that society works. And we've kind of touched on this some already. The political machinery, spiritual aspirations, trade and finance, its script and language. The important thing with this as well, though, although we're talking about coming together in many respects, the main thing we're also talking about, yet infinite in the diversity of the national characteristics of its federated units. So the idea isn't that everybody's coming together to be the same. The idea is we can still be different and still operate together. Can anybody think of an example of how that's something like that is working right now? We're very close to it.
The United States.
The United States of America. Right, exactly. The whole idea here, I mean, for anybody who's traveled around the country, I remember going to South Dakota. South Dakota isn't like, North Carolina or where we used to live up in Virginia or whatever else the deal happens to be. There's lots of different places within the United States that are dramatically different economies, different cultures, everything else like that, but we're still one country, and some would argue the strongest country currently in the world. And so this idea could seem to work. But then some people might say, well, wait a minute. It's all well and good that you have the spiritual background, but what if I don't believe in God? What else is there out there that you can kind of give me that I can kind of hang on to kind of believe that maybe this thing is going to move forward? And we'd like to suggest that really the historical trend of human development would suggest that this is going to happen. We started out with family life, we then moved to tribes, then we moved to city-states, and then we moved to nations. And the process of nation building is pretty much getting close to done. So where are we going to go from here, right? So this would suggest that there's been an upward trend in greater unity in the world. So the question is that unity going to continue beyond nations? Is there any reason why that unity would continue beyond nations? Does that all make sense? Is that fair? So yes, so as you can see, we've got this trend. So the question is this trend continuing? Is there still a desire to have greater and greater unities? And if there is, there should be signs that it's happening. This shouldn't be kind of an underground thing. We should be able to see it, right? So can anybody think of things that are happening that would suggest that the world wants greater and greater levels of unity beyond national sovereignty?
Well, we came up with the League of Nations and then surpassed that with the United Nations, so there's even a trend.
Right, there you go. You got the League of Nations that died out at one point and then came up with the United Nations. Absolutely. What else?
Well, there's the pushback.
Oh, right.
Yeah,
Can
I agree with that.
Did anybody can think of one of the pushbacks that occurred with the formation of the League of Nations?
Yeah, we didn't.
We didn't agree with it, right? Exactly. We didn't join it. The United States did not join the League of Nations, and so you're absolutely right. It's not as if this movement is straight and everything goes and there's no problems at all. And even in terms of the formation of the United States, was it a straight line? No. And we had one of the biggest wars ever to solidify that union. And to a certain degree, that sacrifice is probably what allows this union to even exist to this day. So it's not always going to be straight up. All right. So let's go look to see if there's other places where there might be signs that countries and people want to work together.
Oh, how about the EU?
Yes, the EU is probably the best example of nations really coming together and saying, hey, and we're going to give up a little something on the national sovereignty end, but we think we're going to get more on the other end, so yeah, let's go on and do it. But as was mentioned earlier, with the whole Brexit thing, barely though, it was like 50-point-something% or whatever, but yes, there's a little bit of back and forth with that. So there's lots of different signs that nations and organizations are starting to work together. First of all, one of the things going on is that nation building is almost done. Right now, the UN has about 194 members, and those 194 members represent about 99% of the world's population. So now you have a group of people, nations coming together on a regular basis, and beyond that, there's about 6 dependencies and about several dozen other little things that exist out there in the world that aren't quite independent nations yet. But the idea is that most of the world's population is covered by those independent nations. And at least where I come from, Belize, it was only in 1981 that it actually became independent. So it wasn't altogether that long ago that it achieved its independence. But during the 1900s, over 50 countries became independent. So this process of independence, moving beyond the city-state into the nation, has accelerated and is pretty much reaching its close. So, but while this is reaching its close, we can see that now there was a desire for international organizations to be formed. And since most of those have already been mentioned, might as well just go on and show it. So you had the League of Nations. The League of Nations was formed in 1919. It had 63 members. Then the United Nations came along in 1945 and now has over 194 members. And then you even have things like the International Criminal Court, which was formed in 1998 and has over 123 member states. So you can see that this is something that wasn't just started yesterday and just kind of getting going. It's been a long time that people have been desiring something beyond the nation. The recognition that nations by themselves can't deal with the issues they have to deal with in the world all by themselves. They need to work together. And then, not only that, but you can see that it's just not a few nations either, right? These are largely the majority of the nations in the world that recognize the same thing. So it's clear that not just one group of people, but a large number of people in the world, a large number of the nations in the world recognize that getting together is a good idea and is better than staying separate and apart. Oh, by the way, just for the heck of it, just a little bit. You know, in terms of the United Nations, one of the problems that people have with the United Nations is it has its challenges, because one of the things it was supposed to do is stop war, right? But the United Nations has had a hard time trying to fulfill that mandate. Can anybody think of one of the biggest challenges the United Nations has to stopping war? What is in its structure? What?
United States.
In what way? In what respect? What?
Because security, yeah.
What about the Security Council?
Members can veto,
All members of the Security Council?
Just the permanent.
Just the permanent ones, right, exactly. So the whole idea is, although there's a desire for these international organizations to form, they still have weaknesses in them that don't really allow them to fully, fulfill their mandate. So to just mention, the United Nations has a Security Council. The Security Council, I think, usually has 12 to 13 members on it, something like that. And of that, there's 5 permanent members that are always there. The challenge is, those permanent members, any one of them can veto anything for any reason, just because the whole rest of the world may think it's a good idea that one nation walks up, says no, and it's done. What is one of the few times, I just find this interesting, what is one of the few times that didn't happen and there was actually an enforcement action taken by the United Nations several decades ago?
Korean War.
Why was the United Nations able to act on the Korean War where it hasn't been able to act in many other situations? Because Russia wasn't on the Security Council at the time. They left the United Nations for a period of time. They therefore didn't veto the resolution, and then the UN was able to act and try to stop this. So this is all to say that these organizations are there and are working, but they do have deficiencies that make them a little less effective than they could be otherwise. Okay. Can anybody think of any formal, one of the other things that's happening is there's formal relationships between nations, where nations have gotten together and said, hey, we need to work together on something. We need to do something, and we need to formalize this relationship we have. Can anybody think of any of those formal relations that might have been formed? NATO is one of the biggest ones, absolutely. EU, right, exactly.
I get the name, but there's an African one.
I'm doing okay.
Right, let's see, I forgot which ones I included.
Well, something like that.
Yeah, so you have, African Union. So you have NAFTA, which now might be, it hasn't, I think, been ratified yet. USMC, we'll see whether that happens. Then you have the NATO, which, 1949, 29 members. You have the European Union. It actually started out as an economic agreement that then kind of formed into what it is today. That's back in 1993 with 28 members. The League of Arab States, the African Union, and then there's free trade areas and that type of thing. What you can see is, again, from all over the world, not just one group of people or another, from all over the world, nations have recognized that we're going to be better off if we work together. There's certain things that we just can't do by ourselves, and if we work together, it's going to be better. And you can just see the number of nations that are involved in all of these things that indicate it's not just a small group of people. Okay, so in terms of united action and world undertakings, you have scientific, educational, cultural things that the nations work together on. For example, the International Space Station is probably one of the best known, and that's really cool, right? No nation probably would have wanted to pony up all the money by themselves, but by working together, we're able to create a platform that all the world can really use to go up there and do some interesting experiments. You got environmental concerns. You got such things as Convention of Law of the Sea, World Wildlife Fund, that type of thing. Again, lots of different countries involved. You got poverty that's being dealt with in lots of respects. The World Bank and CARE being created. CARE, 1946, 190 countries involved with that. And terrorism. NATO, of course, is involved with that, but there's also a UN Office of Counterterrorism, which I didn't realize, and that was formed in 2004. So there's issues, especially like with terrorism. What did the United States learn in during 9/11? Or I don't know if we learned it, but the basic idea is we can't just take care of ourselves, right? We could take care of ourselves all day long, and all it takes is a group of people half a world away to make a decision that that's not enough, and then all of a sudden their issues and problems become our issues and problems. So you can easily see where terrorism is one of those things that just can't be taken care of by looking within one's own borders. And the last group of things here is UN declarations and conventions that address serious issues. Does anybody know of any UN declarations that have been made to address issues that people are facing? That's probably not on top of, wouldn't be on top of my list either. You got the Declaration of Human Rights, you got the Convention on Genocide, you got the Rights of the Child, and that's just the beginning. I mean, you look in Wikipedia and you got this whole list of them out there. But again, these are things that have been around for decades that involve lots of different countries. Okay, yes. And beyond all the things that we've talked about, there are technological changes that make viewing the world and organizations as one place. Can anybody think of some technological changes that have really dynamically changed the way that we can look at the world? Okay, name like 3 or 4 of them. Google, right? The search, that makes a huge difference, right?
Internet.
Okay. What's another one? The web in general. All right. Any others?
Cell phones.
Cell phones is huge, right?
Yeah.
Exactly. So all those types of things. The ones that came to mind for me were computers is huge, right? If I want to be able to keep track of 10 million people, and I had to do it back in the day where I had only paper, wasn't going to happen. Now with computers, it's easy. Phones, yeah, big. Internet, huge. Transportation, satellites, all those things are making a huge difference in the world. But the additional thing is that this technology is getting better and it's getting cheaper. I remember does anybody remember what cell phones used to look like back in the day?
Yeah.
Right? Okay, let me bring my cell phone. I remember exactly where it was. And I remember walking in, there's a party my friend was having or whatever, and you had to have almost like a suitcase for the battery, and then you had this phone or whatever the deal is. I mean, it was just huge. Well, of course, nowadays things are just so much different. So I looked at traveling across the United States since we're here. If you did it in a wagon train, it took 5+ months. You had to spend almost half a year to get from like the East Coast to the West Coast. And of course, once trains came along, that got better, but it still took you several weeks. Now, of course, you can do it in a couple hours. You can decide to we can literally decide right now to hop on a plane. We probably still could get to the airport and be on the West Coast by the next morning. That's just incredible. Now the thing is, it's gotten a lot cheaper too. I was looking at this one thing that talked about how a round trip family trip from Boston to LA back in 1941 would cost the equivalent of like $4,539.24. Whereas today, and it'd take 15 hours as well. Whereas today, it costs about 10% of that and can be done in about 6 hours. So it's just dramatically different. And you think about communications across the Atlantic, it used to take weeks. You have to write a letter or something like that and go weeks later, and then, and then weeks back, and then anybody who's written emails know too, a lot of confusion can come because of that stuff. You write someone an email and they misinterpret what you're saying, and they may be doing all kinds of stuff that you're thinking, this is crazy. But now, it's virtually instantaneous. So not only is there apparently is a desire that people have for coming together and doing things together, but now technology allows for that desire to kind of manifest itself in ways that just wasn't possible not so long ago.
I just want to mention, I remember hearing recently of a story of pre sort of 1800s letters being lost, and then on a sunken ship, and then they find the sunken ship and excavated stuff. And they find the letters, they actually preserve the letters.
Right.
So they're looking at lost mail too.
Right.
I mean, we get upset when an email doesn't show up, but there are millions more messages, and much fewer of them are getting lost.
Right, exactly.
Just communication and overall
Absolutely.
that.
It's huge. It's huge. It makes a huge difference. Okay. Yes, okay, this is what I talked about before. Yes, so we have a desire for unity. We've seen that in all these different things, decades now, that people have been trying to work together with lots of different nations, and then we have the technology to kind of allow this to happen. So now, the idea is that despite all of this, though, there's some flaws. There's clearly issues that need to be addressed. So what are some of the problems that people could see that would be there for world peace?
I think the rise of nationalism and
Nationalism, what?
Brexit, some of the things that we're seeing in our political system.
Right.
People are feeling afraid or threatened, so therefore this is how they armor up.
Right.
So that's contra to what we're trying to.
Right. The idea is you want to have peace and unity, and some people are saying, no, that's okay. I don't want to be that close.
Yeah.
Right.
No globalists.
Right.
That's right.
Yes, globalist. That's true. All right. Anything else?
I think some nations don't want to give up what they have. They don't want to share. There's a kind of
That's true, too.
greed and lack of a spiritual vision,
Right.
or spirituality at all.
Right. So what's good for? It's almost a zero-sum game. If I'm going to improve your life, then I must be taking away something from me. So then I don't want to give up anything. Right. Exactly.
What about
Oh,
the
go
fact that historical problems that people have, that if one feels like they've been slighted, something is taken away from them, and it's that if you think about the Palestinian issue and who owns Israel,
Right.
and those are things that, they lost family members to war, and how can I just forgive these people? And it's just those historical conflicts that persist.
Right.
They don't want to give up the trying to get back.
That's true, and it's never going to be really easy to overcome some of that, because there's some really deep ingrained feelings that people have along those lines. So yeah, you've got wars. U.S. is currently, again, the U.S. has as much at stake than virtually anybody else. We're currently involved in 11 different wars around the world. It's crazy. So not only does that mean that U.S. citizens are involved, and U.S. citizens are probably dying, but on top of that, who's paying for all that stuff? Someone's got to be dishing out the cash for this, and it's us. So yeah, that's one of the issues. Terrorism spreading. You got intense suffering of millions of people from all over the world. And I didn't realize this until looking it up. There's a good number, there's at least 52 countries where, in terms of hunger rates, it's serious to extremely alarming. That's a good portion of the world. It's almost like a quarter of the nations in the world where just getting a meal is an issue. That's kind of crazy. That's really a serious issue. So, for some, they concentrate on the flaws and believe that human nature will not allow peace. Yeah, we have these difficulties, things have been bad for a long time. The genie's looking at the Middle East and say, how can this be done? People have hated each other for thousands of years, all these other type of things. So it's created this paralyzing contradiction. You have two views out there. You want peace and united action, and we saw examples of all of this stuff, but then you have the selfish and aggressive nature as well. And so the two are kind of fighting each other, and so the whole movement towards peace is hard to see how it can happen unless we can resolve this difficulties. So I think we've talked about this a little bit, but can people see this or agree with this? Yeah, I think most people can see it, easily understand why there would be this paralyzing contradiction. The idea is, okay, let's see if we can pull things out a little bit and see it in a way that would allow us to kind of resolve this sum so that we can maybe feel as if we at least have a chance to move forward. Go ahead.
Can you just explain the second statement again, the one hinder movement?
Oh, okay, right. So I think the hindering movement is like, imagine if you had a canoe, and one person's rowing to go one way, another person's rowing to go another way. You just can't get there. Plus, so we don't have the same vision of the world and what we're going to do. Some people are nationalists, other people are globalists, all this other type of stuff. But I think beyond that, I think the thing that's as important is that if people see the world as the humans being selfish and aggressive and don't believe this can work, then they won't put any effort into seeing it happen. So for example, if you just look at what's happening in the United States now, there's talk of increasing the military budget even more than it is already, right? And the United States already spends, I think, on a military basis, more than the next 30 countries combined. So we're already spending a lot, but now because people don't believe that world peace is possible, the only solution is to spend more on military, right? But what if we really believed that peace was possible? What if we saw that that was a real possibility? Might we not switch some of that money and say, hey, let's put this money into building peace. If we're going to wage war, why don't we wage peace, right? So the idea is, if we don't resolve this contradiction, if we don't figure out a way to get around this, then we won't put in the necessary resources to ever really see peace as a reality. Okay, there we go. Okay. So the question then becomes, is human nature inherently selfish? And if you look at the past, might one come to that conclusion? Yeah, exactly. You just look at what's going on in the world. You know, there's lots of different things that have happened, wars that have gone on, people, you know, killing or taking over whole groups of people. It's easy to see how one could come to that conclusion. But maybe we can look at it a little differently and see human development as an evolutionary process. Just as there's an evolutionary process with a child growing up, right? If we held a child, if we said a child at 2 is the be-all and end-all to what a person could be, then we would never even really work towards them having the capabilities they have when they're 25 years old, right? A child at 2 can't understand calculus. Why would I ever send my child to school? Because they're never going to be able to understand that stuff, right? But if we look at it a little differently and see it as an evolutionary process, maybe we can see that the earlier stages of human history were really like humanity moving through infancy, childhood, and then into adolescence. And we know that all of us, I think, who have gone through adolescence, I know my adolescence, it's challenging, right? You're kind of going from a child to almost being an adult. It's not easy because you don't really quite know what's going on, and then you have all this back and forth that's difficult, and now we have a chance to come of age. So if we look at the past behaviors as an expression of immature stages of development, maybe we don't need to tie ourselves to that past and say, well, that's the only way we can ever be. That's the expression of our highest aspirations. But more that was, we went through that process, we've learned, and now hopefully we can move on to another stage that's even better. So the natural thing is that right now we have you know, some learning to do, and that's where the turbulence comes in, because we're about to move to a coming of age that we've never really experienced before, right? We've never really been there. Does that kind of sort of make sense? All right?
Yes.
At least, you know, because I was thinking about this, one thing in particular that comes to mind is the whole issue of slavery, right? Back in the day, slavery was seen as normal. I mean, that was just the way it worked, right? You went over, in my mind, I was almost taking it lightly, but it's serious. You went over, you killed some people, you took over their tribe, and then you said, okay, all these people are now my slaves, and you know, that's the way the world works. It doesn't work that way anymore. I'm not saying there's no slavery anywhere and there's nobody ever mistreated, but more so, that's not seen as accepted behavior. If people are doing it, they're doing undercover because they know that if it was above ground, people would be complaining. So there's things that humanity is beginning to show some development that it hasn't really had in the past. So the idea is, if we can see that this process of human development is evolutionary and that we have the ability to act based on our kind of higher natures beyond what we've been able to accomplish in the past, that kind of opens up the possibility of solutions in terms of world peace. So the question then would become, if this is something that we can at least either accept or kind of work with in terms of possibly moving forward, then the thing is what do we do next? How do we actually move towards world peace in an effective way? And you need this in part because if you have a business or you want to start a business and you go to a bank, what is the first thing they're going to ask you if you want to ask them for money? What's your plan? You know, the people aren't going to just give you money because you're a nice person and they think you're great. They want to know what the plan is. And the more likely that the plan makes sense, the more likely people will buy into it, and the more likely they're willing to invest because they say, wow, this plan sounds really good, right? So let's at least look at some ideas as to what's going on here. Let's see if I can do this. Okay. So in terms of moving forward, some of the things we might want to look at is, what is the vision for this, future? What are we really trying to move towards? And then look at the role of religion in this. Is it positive or negative? What new attitudes might we need to adopt? What kind of meetings or gatherings might we need to kind of get this to happen? What new institutions might we need? What about this idea of consultation, resolving difficulties, working things out together? And then what are some of the critical principles we have to look at if we're really going to have this advance? So if you had a vision of world peace, what are some aspects of that you would include? What would that look like?
You would care for someone else's plight the same way that you would care for your plight.
Okay.
If they're hungry, you should feel hungry. If they're poor, you should feel the empathy.
Right.
And compassion about where they're at versus where you're at.
So we're all one, right? We're all kind of family. We're all looking out for each other.
That's right. So just because you're born in the U.S. versus Guatemala, we were speaking with that with Maria, that it's it's a lottery. You were born here, and there's war and strife and hunger, but here there isn't. So.
Gotcha. Any other ideas?
Equal opportunity for everyone.
Okay.
To make the most of what their capabilities are.
Gotcha. Okay. And then.
A model for the equitable allocation of resources.
Okay. Right. That's true.
But you have to first come to a common understanding before you can have one.
Oh, this is very good. All right. That's the kind of direction we need to move in. All right. So because we're going to get to that pretty soon, that common understanding. Okay. So some of the things that the writing suggests in this whole deal is that economic barriers were permanently demolished, and we can see how that effectively is used in the United States, right? You can move things across borders, and that's what makes the United States, in some respects, so effective in terms of material advancement. Interdependence of capital and labor. So you're talking about distribution, right? You realize that just because you have the money doesn't mean that you should be running the show and all this other type of stuff. Religious fanaticism and strife will be forever still. So this whole idea of figuring out how we can get religions to reconcile with each other. Racial animosity will have been finally extinguished. So this idea of one family, right? It's not you or us and them or whatever the deal is. We're all one. And a single code of international law. This idea we got to have some agreement is what's going on, even though we're going to touch on agreement again a little later. And then we talked about capricious and militant nationalism will be transmuted into an abiding consciousness of world citizenship. So these are just some of the ideas there. Of course, this is, we could literally talk about this all day long, right? But this is just some of the broad outlines of some of the things you'd want to include in a vision of kind of like world peace going forward, or at least a lot of people would see as being reasonable, right? Not everybody may agree. Same thing. Okay. The other thing it kind of talks on this of world citizenship is that it insists upon the subordination of national impulses in the interest of imperative claims of a unified world. So the whole idea is, just like the United States, we have states and we have the federal. There's lots of rights that the states give up and cede to the federal union. The whole idea here is we're talking about something similar, but on the national level instead. Good. Okay. And this is one thing in the statement, and I'm getting a lot of these ideas from the statement, The Promise of World Peace. And one of the things I found interesting in that statement was a lot of talk was done on religion. And I try to sum up some of it here. And I encourage everyone, The Promise of World Peace. We talked about Google, right? It makes it easy. I was thinking, boy, we need to have the statements here. But you don't really need the statements, right? The Promise of World Peace, Baha'i. Boom, the statement will come up there. You can find it yourself. But the basic idea is it talked about that religion has had a very positive effect in the world. You can see that even in terms of the laws and morality we have. It's not right to steal, right? You're not supposed to commit adultery. Sounds like the Ten Commandments in there. So there is that relationship there. But it's had detrimental effects as well. But one of the things that the writings would suggest is religion is the most powerful force for unity in the world. But religion always been a positive force for unity?
Yeah.
Right. And so that's where the idea is that religion is oftentimes corrupted. And so that's what we have to work against, is to remove, or as much as possible, work against the corruption by really focusing on the fact that there are common threads in all religions. One of them being that, we're supposed to treat each other like ourselves would like to be treated. And that if we recognize that the messengers are kind of coming from one source and they're like one extended message, that we'd have much better benefits if we're willing to work together. Even if we can't necessarily agree on everything, if we're willing to work together, things would work a little smoother. Okay. The other one is, this one is always an interesting one to me. There needs to be a new attitude, and we've talked about this multiple times already, right? This idea is not Guatemala and United States or, Congo and Egypt or whatever. We're all one family. This idea that world order can be founded only on an unshakable consciousness of the oneness of mankind, a spiritual truth which all human sciences confirm. And this one always has a special meaning for me, because this is the first talk that my wife and I gave together. Before we got married, we were sitting there remembering this quote, because we were going to give it as part of our talk. So in any case, and what the other quote says, this is the first fundamental prerequisite for the reorganization and administration of the world as one country, a home of humankind. So this is the first thing. If there's nothing else that we need to work on, I think you were talking about simple and everything else like that. A lot of things may be complicated. There's all working parts. I may not understand economics and science and all these other type of things. But if there's one thing that you wanted to work on and say, okay, I only can keep one thing in my mind at a time. I need to be focused. This is what it is. Work on this one fundamental prerequisite, unshakable consciousness of the oneness of mankind. Communicating that idea, getting other people to discuss it and perhaps believe it, would be the one thing that anybody can, the more that we can do that, the more likely we're able to have a better world all the way around.
Question?
What's that?
What exactly is the meaning of the oneness of mankind?
Okay, that's a good one. And I think in one respect, it just talks about here that basically the abandonment of anything which enables people to consider themselves superior to others. So I think that's the underlying goal, that when we talk about the oneness of mankind, any belief that allows one group of people to think they're better than another, that kind of counteracts not only a spiritual truth that I think most writings or religions would put forward, but it says right here all the scientific evidence as well. But I think beyond that, it goes back to one of the other quotes we had in here that talked about how we want unity, but we want all the diversity of the federated units and that type of thing. So the idea is unity and diversity. So we're not talking about sameness. We're just talking about all the things that we're talking about, following the truth. And if you go and look at the truth from a scientific and spiritual basis, everything suggests that we're all one. And what we mean by one is not that we're all the same, but that we have those same kind of rights and everything else like that. Does that kind of make sense? Okay, so someone talked about having the same rules. How are we going to work that out? Well, if you have 20 people and you want to have the same rules, what's one of the first things you're going to do? You got to get together, right? I might have some ideas, you have some ideas, but how are we going to have a united set of ideas unless we all get together? And then I think at one point we were talking about the idea of, how is this going to happen? People won't want to do it, whatever the deal is. There's one quote that kind of addresses that thing. It says, "The time must come when the imperative necessity of holding a vast, all-embracing assemblage of men," of course that means people, will be universally recognized. The rulers and kings of the earth must needs attend it, and participating in its deliberations must consider ways and means as will lay the foundations of the world's great peace amongst men. Now there's several things about that, right? If you have a meeting too early, it's not a good idea either, right? You get people together, you put forward ideas, but people aren't ready for it, and so they don't accept it. So, that doesn't make any sense. But I think what this quote suggests, there will be imperative necessity. There will be a day when people will look at things and say, I may not have wanted to do this yesterday, but things have changed and we need to talk. Let's get together. And so it makes clear not only that eventually this necessity will be recognized, but it tells you who needs to be there. It's the rulers and kings, or whoever has been elected, kings, whatever. Those people need to get together, and they need to talk to each other about how to establish the foundations of the great peace amongst men. But the thing is, what should the foundations of greatest peace? What should the foundations of this great peace be? Well, there's some suggestions there as well. So the idea is there needs to be a general consultation, and there needs to be a binding treaty proclaiming it to all the world, regarding it as sacred to all that dwell on earth. So one, we talked about, I think, frontiers and boundaries, right? The idea is, in some cases, it's important to set those frontiers so it's clear who owns what, right? And that's true with Belize and Guatemala, right? Our countries are still having an argument over where the boundaries are. So it'd be good to clear that up. The underlying relations of governments, all international agreements must be discerned. The size of armaments of every government should be strictly limited. And if any government violates any one of its provisions, all the governments on earth must arise to reduce it to submission. And once this is done, the earth can recover from its ills and will remain eternally safe and secure. So the whole idea here is there will be a time when it's necessary, and these are some of the things that likely need to be discussed if this process of world peace is going to move forward. I'm realizing it's getting a little later, so I'm trying to speed this up. But beyond that, if we do have agreements in terms of moving forward, we need to have what we call the world superstate. We talked about nationalism. Are people going to accept it? All these other type of things. I think that's something that would have to be worked on. But the basic idea is there would be a need for an international executive, a world parliament, and a supreme tribunal, or justice component. And the idea between all these different institutions, you have ideas of collective security and the use of consultation to kind of move things forward. And I think this is probably one of the more important but less recognized areas that there needs to be a change. The idea is that you just look at what's happening today in the United States when people talk. Oftentimes people talk as if what they're saying is right and correct, and the other person is bad. And not only that, not only are they wrong, but they're bad and maybe all these other type of things. Well, the idea here is the objective of consultation should be the investigation of truth, not the setting forth of your own opinion. And it's not voiced as either correct or right, but before expressing any ideas, you should be listening to what other people have to say. And beyond all that it's critical that the members love each other. If that love isn't there, then this whole process has a difficulty working. Do you kind of see how this is a little bit different than So if we can use this to kind of talk about and resolve issues, we're likely to be much more successful than we are today. Okay, and there's certain issues that need to be addressed in terms of establishing world peace. One of them is racism. Can anybody think of any other ones that might need to be addressed? You mentioned one already, with the wealth thing.
Resources.
Right. Proper allocation of resources, right? Can anybody think of anything else? Quality of sexes. You got it. So you all got the general idea here. So the idea is racism, inordinate disparity of rich and poor, unbridled nationalism, religious strife, emancipation of women, and universal education are just some of the issues that need to be addressed. And one of the things that this statement addresses too is that in all of these different areas, there's other things under this that are suggested or recommended. So for example, in terms of universal education, it talks about this is a greatly important issue because the rise and fall of virtually any civilization is dependent upon education. And that the first priority of education should be to educate women and girls. So why should it be women and girls first?
Primary nurturers initially.
Right. And if a woman knows how to read, it's very hard to see how the children will not know how to read. So the idea is that yes, women and children and girls should be the first ones. And then one of the things that needs to be taught related to what we've already seen is that world citizenship should be part of the training. And beyond that, the idea is to raise some of these values to the point of principle. So that whenever we're looking for solution, we should be considering these principles before we try to advocate something and push something forward. Okay, so the idea, I think, was mentioned earlier is, what can we do ourselves to further this principle of peace and world peace? So one of them, of course, is live lives based on the principles we discussed. Does anybody else have any other ideas that might come to mind? That if today we walk out of here, we wanted to do something to kind of push this thing forward. Do you have any concept of what things you might want to do in your life to kind of
sort of explore, redefine what it means to be male. Right?
Okay, that's good, right?
And it affects both women and men.
Right.
Men get the idea because how women, what they expect, and also men explore what they do, and they, whatever it is that they think they do, and then they suddenly think that's what it means to be a man.
Right. Exactly.
Getting voted by next Tuesday.
Election season, right? So vote for those that will further ideas conducive to peace, right? So the idea, you're absolutely right, it's election season, so if you're going to mention it, the idea is that we're supposed to take our responsibilities seriously, right? And we're supposed to be voting for people. So if we really believe in world peace, kind of related to some of the things that have already been mentioned, we would believe that what's good for them is good for me, so we should be considered, so then we would vote for people that have that type of view as well, right? So voting is one of the things that you can consider. The other thing is to join organizations that promote humanitarian ideals. So for example, I guess you have the CORE, Chatham Organizing for Racial Equality. That's a great idea, right? We're talking about this idea of one family, all these other type of things. That's the organization promoting that idea. Participating with them might be a good idea. Amnesty International is another one that's more on the international level. There's even things like the United States Institute for Peace, which I think is almost semi-governmental organization that works to achieve peace throughout the world. And attending events that promote peace that are put on by different organizations can be done as well.
I think that each one of us, though, not just joining organizations, but, or maybe this is how we could do it, is to make it an effort to interact with those who are different from
Right.
us in their lives, or live in places.
Right.
Whatever. Brazil. That to actually put it into practice.
Right. No, absolutely. That's a very good point. And that's one of the simpler ones to do. I mean, when you walk into a room, who do you go to talk to? Do you go to talk to the person that you're familiar with, that you kind of know, that kind of looks like you, or do you go to someone who's a little different? Yes, exactly. Some decisions as simple as that might have an influence on things. All right, and then also you can promote ideas that support peace. I know that in the past I've met people who are working towards an international language. There's one called Esperanto that some people are involved in. I've known one or two people who have been involved in that effort. So it all depends, but there's other ones out there as well that might be useful to promote too. So I just want to leave with two final points. The first one I thought was the most interesting of all, though. So one of them says, so let us try, as an experiment, peace. And if the results of peace are bad, then we can choose if it would be better to go back to the old state of war. So the whole idea is we've spent 6,000 years on this war thing. Where has it gotten us? And if we don't like what we've gotten, why don't we try an experiment? And the worst thing that can happen when we try to experiment, we can always go back to what we did before. So I like that perspective. But the other one I thought was good too, is these are the darkest hours before the break of day. Peace, as promised, will come at night's end. Press on to meet the dawn. And so that whole concept of it's darkest before the dawn, right? If you give up right when it gets darkest, you don't realize that the next step is right there where you get the dawn. And so I think one of the things that the writings would suggest is it's going to get dark. There's going to be times when it's not going to be fun and it's going to be dark. But if we keep on pressing, that dawn should eventually break, and it'd be a pretty exciting time to be around. So I think that's most of it. Any thoughts?